Have you ever felt like you were waiting for a season in your life to end? A time when the days all blend into one, under a sky the color of slate, and the future feels as damp and heavy as the air before a storm. For a young man named Owen, in the small village of Glenbarrow, that season had lasted for what felt like a lifetime. Glenbarrow was a quiet place, tucked into a valley where a wide, steady river curved around the feet of ancient, forested mountains. The last of the summer tourists had long since departed, taking the bustle and noise with them, leaving behind the quieter, more comforting rhythm of local life. But for Owen, this quiet was a heavy blanket. The rainy season was clinging on, and a persistent mist softened the edges of the world, blurring the line between the river and the shore, the mountains and the sky. He lived a life of quiet poverty, observing the village from a distance. He would watch the fishermen mending their nets by the water's edge, their movements slow and practiced. He would hear the rattle of the delivery truck making its way down the uneven lane, its familiar scent of oil mixing with the smell of damp earth and wet stone. From his small cottage, he could just make out the distant shouts and laughter from the schoolyard, a sound from a world that felt entirely separate from his own. His dreams, like the landscape, were waterlogged, unable to find a spark in the damp air. One afternoon, seeking refuge from a sudden downpour, Owen found himself in the dilapidated shed at the back of his property, a place his late grandfather had used as a workshop. A stray beam of weak light cut through the grime of a window, illuminating a dusty wooden chest in the corner. Inside, nestled in rotting cloth, was a set of old woodworking tools. They weren't treasures, they were rusted, the wooden handles worn smooth and dark with the oil of hands long since past. But as Owen picked up a heavy handplane, feeling its weight and balance, something shifted. It was a connection to his heritage, to a past he barely knew, and to the forgotten idea of creating something with his own two hands. His first action was small, almost insignificant. He decided to clean them. He spent the rest of the afternoon with a wire brush and oil, the rhythmic scraping sound a stark contrast to the drumming rain outside. He worked until the rust gave way to the dull gleam of old steel, and the scent of oil filled the small shed. The next morning, something was different. The incessant drizzle had stopped. For the first time in weeks, the mist burned off early, revealing a sky of startling clarity, and a sun that cast a soft, golden light across the valley. The air was clear and crisp, and the cold on his nose was a refreshing shock. Looking out, Owen saw the world anew. Along the riverbank, the first hints of autumn had appeared. The leaves of the birch and poplar trees were tinged with a delicate yellow, catching the morning light like scattered coins. The river, no longer a sullen grey, now reflected the brilliant blue of the sky and the emerging colours on its banks. The mountains, which had always seemed so oppressive, now stood majestic and clear, their rugged slopes a testament to ancient strength. The world hadn't changed, but his perception of it had. Holding a newly cleaned chisel in his hand, Owen felt the first stirrings of a new season beginning. Not in the world outside, but within himself. That spark of inspiration was not a wildfire. It was a small, fragile flame that needed tending. Owen began to work. He started with simple things, repairing a wobbly chair for his kitchen, carving a small, clumsy-looking bird from a piece of scrap wood. There were more failures than successes. Wood split under a clumsy hand, joints refused to align, and his frustration often felt as heavy as the returning grey clouds on a damp afternoon. He learned that progress, like the autumn weather, was unpredictable. A week of brilliant, sunlit clarity could be followed by days of frustrating rain and fog. But for every failure, he learned. He spent hours just looking at the wood, feeling its grain, learning its language. His hands, once soft and idle, became calloused and strong, learning the subtle dialect of each tool. As his skill grew, the world outside seemed to respond in kind. The landscape, as if mirroring his own inner transformation, exploded into a breathtaking spectacle of color. The hillsides were set ablaze, a palette of gold, crimson, and rusty brown painted across the valley. The ancient forests of oak, beech, and sycamore became a fiery canopy, their leaves blanketing the winding roads. The rowan trees were dotted with berries of vibrant red, a stark contrast against the blazing yellows and oranges. The air itself seemed to change, carrying the rich, earthy scent of fallen leaves and the comforting smell of wood smoke curling from village chimneys. Owen was no longer an isolated observer. He started talking to people, asking Liam, an old fisherman, about which woods best resisted the river's dampness. He helped his neighbor, a kind woman named Eoif, mend her broken gate, feeling a quiet pride in her simple, grateful smile. He was slowly, carefully, weaving himself back into the communal fabric of Glenbarrow. His greatest test came in the form of a bookshelf he had promised to build for the small village school. He poured weeks of effort into it, but an unexpected damp spell caused the untreated wood to warp and crack. Staring at the ruined project, despair washed over him. The sky outside turned grey, a cold rain began to fall, and the temptation to return to the familiar stillness of his old life was immense. But this time, something was different. He had felt the sun. He remembered the satisfaction of a clean cut, the beauty of a perfect joint. He took a deep breath, deconstructed the warped shelves, and began again, this time with the hard-won wisdom of his failure. The culmination of Owen's work was not a grand event, but a quiet gathering at the village school. The shorter autumn days now cast a gentle, golden glow, and the warmth from a crackling fire in the corner pushed back the evening chill. Owen's bookshelf stood in the corner, simple but beautiful. He had carved the local flora into its sides, the distinct shape of oak leaves and the delicate clusters of rowan berries, a tribute to the landscape that had inspired him. There was no loud applause, only a soft murmur of appreciation. He watched as the children, their faces bright with excitement, eagerly placed their worn books onto the smooth, sturdy shelves. He saw Liam, the old fisherman, run a hand over the carved wood and give him a slow, meaningful nod of approval. Awefi touched his arm and told him quietly, "You have the heart of the valley in this work, Owen." That was his harvest. It wasn't wealth or fame. It was the quiet respect of his community, the joy on the children's faces, and the deep, unshakable sense of purpose that now settled within him. This single act opened new doors. Small commissions began to come in. A new handle for a spade, a repaired window frame, a small toy for a child. His life was no longer one of poverty, but one of modest, sustainable work. He hadn't escaped Glenbarrow. He had finally found his place within it. Now, as late autumn settles over the valley, Owen often stands by the river. Most of the leaves have fallen, creating a thick golden blanket on the forest floor and the village paths. The air is colder, carrying the sharp promise of the coming winter.